Jack's 68. He worked as an exterminator for 25 years, retired to Florida, lives in a mobile home he owns outright, gets $2,700 a month from Social Security, and he's trapped. His lot rent went from $435 to almost $900 in 14 years. He now pays land tax he didn't pay before. His roof needs $8,500 in repairs. Citizens Insurance wants $3,000 a year for coverage. He can't get a loan because he doesn't own the land under his home. He makes too much to qualify for food assistance, but not enough to actually live. And the math? The math says he's cooked. But here's the weird part. He can't sell because who's going to buy a mobile home on rented land in a market where everyone else is trying to escape to? So I started digging into this. And what I found wasn't just a story about one guy getting squeezed. It's a story about how an entire generation made what looked like the smartest financial decision possible and ended up building their own cage. I'm going to walk you through exactly how Florida went from being the retirement dream to a trapdoor that's actively closing. And by the end, you're going to understand why what 99% of retirees did in the 2000s is turning into a textbook case of what not to do. More importantly, I'm going to show you the 3 specific financial principles that got violated here so you don't end up in the same situation when you're 68. Here's my central metaphor, and I'm going to keep coming back to it. Think of Florida retirement like buying a ticket to an all-inclusive resort. The brochure shows beaches, no state income tax, warm weather. You pay what looks like a reasonable price. But here's what the brochure doesn't tell you. The resort can change the rules whenever it wants. Drink prices, they go up. Beach access, now there's a fee. That all-inclusive meal plan? Well, portions got smaller, but the price went up 40%. And the real kicker, you already sold your house up north to buy this ticket. You can't just leave, you're locked in. That's Florida right now for about 2.7 million retirees who are doing this exact math in their heads every month. Let's start with how we got here, because the Florida retirement story used to make perfect sense. Back in the 80s and 90s, Florida offered a genuine arbitrage opportunity. You could sell a house in New Jersey or Michigan for, let's say, $300,000. Move to Florida, buy something comparable for $180,000. You pocketed the difference. No state income tax meant your pension, and Social Security went further. Property taxes were manageable because of homestead exemption laws. Insurance was expensive, but not insane. You could actually live on $1,500 to $2,000 a month pretty comfortably if you owned your place outright. The math worked. I knew a guy, Jerry, sold commercial refrigeration equipment in Cleveland for 30 years, retired in 2003. He ran the numbers like an engineer. Sold his Cleveland house for $290,000. Bought a condo in Fort Myers for $165,000. His property taxes in Cleveland were running $4,200 a year. In Florida, $1,800 thanks to the homestead exemption and the Save Our Homes cap that limited assessment increases to 3% annually. His insurance was $800 a year. HOA was $200 a month. He was pulling in $2,800 a month from Social Security and a small pension. After housing costs, he had about $1,900 a month for everything else. Food, gas, entertainment, occasional travel. He felt rich. This was the Florida deal everyone wanted. But here's where the first crack appears. The Florida model only worked if you understood you were making a one-way bet. You were trading flexibility for lower costs. Once you sold that Cleveland house and moved to Florida, you couldn't just move back. Cleveland housing prices kept going up. Florida housing prices kept going up. But your fixed income, that went up maybe 2% a year if you were lucky. So the trap was already being set. You just couldn't see it yet because everything was still cheap enough that the math worked. Now here's where it gets interesting. Florida's tax structure is designed around a very specific principle. No state income tax means the state has to get revenue from somewhere else. So they get it from property taxes, sales taxes, and fees. But they also offer this seemingly generous homestead exemption to protect retirees. You get up to $50,000 knocked off your assessed value. Plus, your annual assessment increases are capped at 3%. Sounds great, right? But this creates a perverse incentive structure that most people never think about. A story to illustrate this. Imagine you own a restaurant and you promise your regular customers they'll never pay more than 3% extra per year for their favorite meal. But your costs? Food costs are up 9%. Labor costs up 12%. Insurance up 18%. Energy costs up 14%. What do? You can't just eat those costs. So you do two things. First, you shrink the portions. Second, you hammer the new customers. Your regulars get their 3% increase, but the meal is now 30% smaller. And that new guy who just walked in, he's paying double what your regulars pay for the same tiny portion. That's exactly what Florida local governments did. The homesteaded properties got their 3% cap, but new buyers, they paid full assessed value with no cap until they established their own homestead. New construction, taxed at full freight. Commercial properties, absolutely destroyed with tax increases because they have no homestead protection. And here's the sneaky part. All those fees I mentioned, those aren't capped. Garbage collection fees, stormwater fees, fire assessment fees, street lighting fees. These can go up 10, 20, 30% in a single year, and there's nothing homestead exemption does to stop it. I pulled the data from the Florida League of Cities. Between 2010 and 2024, the average municipal fee revenue in Florida increased by 87%. Not 87% total, 87% per capita adjusted for population growth. Property tax revenue only went up 41% in the same period because of homestead caps. So cities just shifted the burden to fees. A retiree who thought they were protected by homestead exemption saw their total local government costs go up just as fast as everyone else. They just didn't see it on the property tax line. But now you're probably thinking, okay, that's annoying, but it's still Florida, still no state income tax, still cheaper than up north. And that was true until insurance went completely insane. Let me give you the timeline. 2004 and 2005. Florida gets hit by Charley, Ivan, Francis, Jean, Dennis, Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. 8 major hurricanes in 2 years. Insurance companies start hemorrhaging money. They either leave the state entirely or jack up rates. By 2006, if you could even get private insurance, you were paying 3 to 4 times what you paid in 2003. A policy that cost $800 a year was now $2,500 to $3,500. So Florida created Citizens Property Insurance as the insurer of last resort. It was supposed to be temporary. It was supposed to only cover people who couldn't get private insurance. But here's what actually happened. Citizens became the largest property insurer in Florida because they artificially suppressed rates to keep them affordable. They were running what was essentially a subsidized insurance scheme backed by the state. And for a while this worked. Retirees could get coverage for $1,500 to $2,000 a year through Citizens when private insurers wanted $5,000 plus. But Citizens wasn't pricing risk accurately. They were pricing politically. And when Hurricane Ian hit in 2022 as a Category 4 storm, causing $53 billion in damage, followed by Idalia and others, the whole system imploded. Citizens had to raise rates dramatically just to remain solvent. I'm looking at their rate filings right now. Citizens approved rate increases of 40% in 2023, another 14% in 2024, and they're asking for another 12% in 2025. That's 74% cumulative in 3 years. So let's go back to our guy, Jack. He owns his mobile home outright. No mortgage. Sounds great. But he doesn't own the land. He rents the lot. That lot rent has gone from $435 to almost $900 in 14 years. That's 107% increase. His Social Security went up maybe 25% in that same period. The lot rent increase alone ate his entire Social Security increase, plus another $1,500 a year. But wait, there's more, as they say. He now pays property tax on land he doesn't even own. How does that work? In Florida, mobile homeowners pay property tax on the home itself. But in many parks, they also get hit with special assessments that are essentially pass-through taxes from the landowner. These show up as land tax or tax pass-through fees. Jack's paying $341 a year for this. Then there's his insurance. He got quoted $3,000 a year by Citizens for a mobile home. $3,000 on a structure probably worth $40,000. That's a 7.5% annual insurance cost. And he still needs it because he needs to protect the only asset he has. Add it up. $900 in lot rent times 12 is $10,800. Add $341 in land tax. Add $3,000 in insurance if he buys it. Add, let's say, $250 a month for electricity times 12, which is $3,000. He's at $17,141 before he buys a single piece of food. He gets $2,700 a month, which is $32,400 a year. After housing and utilities, he has $15,259 for everything else. Food, gas, medicine, phone, internet, clothing, household items, any entertainment, any travel, any emergency. That's $1,271 a month. And he's supposed to save for an $8,500 roof out of that. Look, I've run hundreds of retirement scenarios. I've seen all the Monte Carlo simulations. I've read every withdrawal rate study. And this violates every single safe retirement principle. You're supposed to keep your housing costs below 30% of gross income. Jack's at 53% before housing maintenance. You're supposed to have liquidity for emergencies. He can't get a loan. You're supposed to have inflation protection. His income grows 2%. His costs grow 8%. You're supposed to have optionality. He can't leave because he can't sell. And here's what makes this truly brutal. Jack is not an outlier. The Florida Healthcare Association did a survey in 2023. 19% of Florida retirees reported they were considering leaving the state due to cost of living increases. 19% of 2.7 million is 513,000 people. Over 500,000 Florida retirees actively thinking about bailing. But here's the problem. Where do they go? Let me tell you about the retirement arbitrage trap. It's the same principle as any arbitrage. It only works if you can move faster than the market adjusts. The Florida arbitrage worked great in the 90s and 2000s because the cost differential was stable and large. But now, every low-cost state is getting hammered with the same dynamics. Property insurance is exploding everywhere that has weather. Property taxes are rising everywhere that needs infrastructure. Healthcare costs are rising everywhere. The only variable is state income tax. So retirees look at states like Tennessee, no state income tax, lower property values, or Texas, no state income tax, but property taxes are brutal. Or Alabama, low everything, but you're in Alabama. And they run the math and realize the savings are marginal at best, and the transaction costs of moving again are enormous. Selling a home in a market where buyers know sellers are desperate. Buying in a new market where sellers know buyers are desperate. Moving costs. New doctor, new pharmacy, new everything. Starting over with no community ties at age 68 or 70 or 75, so they stay. And they make smaller and smaller adjustments to try to make it work. They drop their insurance and pray. They defer maintenance until something catastrophic happens. They eat less. They stop driving as much to save gas. They don't visit family because they can't afford airfare. They become effectively trapped in a place they moved to for freedom. Here's the second escalation, and this one blindsided a lot of people. The mobile home and manufactured housing trap. Back in the 90s and 2000s, mobile homes were marketed as affordable retirement housing. You could buy a decent double wide for $40,000 to $60,000. Put it on a lot in a 55-plus community. Pay $300 to $400 a month in lot rent. Own your home outright. Low monthly costs, warm weather, community amenities. Seem perfect for someone on a fixed income. But the entire business model depended on lot rent staying reasonable. And here's where incentive structure comes in. Who owns these mobile home parks? Increasingly, it's not local families or small operators. It's private equity. Carlyle Group, Blackstone, Apollo, and a bunch of smaller funds spent the 2010s buying up mobile home parks across the Sun Belt. Why? Because they recognized it was the perfect captive customer scenario. Think about the power dynamic. You own a home, but not the land under it. Moving a mobile home costs $10,000 to $15,000 if you can even find someone to do it. Most mobile homes can't be moved without significant damage. Even if you could move it, where would you move it to? Most parks have waiting lists or don't allow used homes over a certain age. So you're functionally stuck. The park owner can raise rent and you have zero negotiating leverage. You either pay or you walk away from your largest asset. One park in Clearwater got bought by a private equity fund in 2018. Lot rents were $475 a month. By 2024, they were $790. That's a 66% increase in 6 years. Residents organized, protested, begged the city council to intervene. The city said their hands were tied. It's private property. The fund argued they were just bringing rents to market rates and needed to cover increased insurance, taxes, and maintenance, which was partially true, but mostly it was because they could. Their investors expected a 12 to 15% annual return, and rent increases were the easiest way to deliver it. And here's the really dark part. The fund knew exactly what they were doing. They knew residents couldn't leave. They knew raising rents would force out the poorest residents who would then abandon their homes. The fund would then take possession of those abandoned homes, do minimal repairs, and sell them to new retirees for $40,000 to $50,000. Then start the rent increase cycle all over again. It's a perfect extraction machine. I found data from the Manufactured Housing Institute. In Florida, the average lot rent increased 68% between 2015 and 2024. The average Social Security benefit increased 22% in the same period. If you were a mobile home park resident on fixed income, you got destroyed. Your largest expense nearly doubled, while your income went up by a fifth. Now, the third escalation, and this one is the killer: healthcare and the Medicare trap. Everyone knows Medicare covers a lot, but not everything. You need a supplement plan or an advantage plan to fill the gaps. Monthly premiums for a decent Medicare supplement run anywhere from $150 to $300 depending on age and health. Plus, you still have copays, deductibles, and prescription costs. But here's what catches people. As you age, your healthcare costs don't stay flat. They accelerate. A 70-year-old has different needs than a 65-year-old. By 80, you're probably on 6 to 8 maintenance medications. Maybe you need regular physical therapy. Maybe you need durable medical equipment. Maybe you need home health care a few hours a week. None of this is cheap, even with insurance. The Kaiser Family Foundation did a study in 2023. Average out-of-pocket healthcare spending for Medicare beneficiaries in Florida was $6,700 a year. That includes premiums, copays, prescriptions, everything. But that's the average. The median was lower, which means a significant number of people were spending $10,000, $12,000, $15,000 a year or more. If you're Jack pulling in $32,400 a year and spending $17,100 on housing and utilities, you have $15,259 left. If healthcare costs you $7,000, you're down to $8,259. That's $688 a month for food, gas, phone, internet, clothing, household items, and any form of entertainment or life enjoyment. And it gets worse. Florida rejected Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. So if you're a retiree who doesn't qualify for traditional Medicaid because you make too much, but you can't afford private insurance supplements, you're in a coverage gap. You have Medicare, but not enough supplemental coverage to protect you from catastrophic costs. One hospital stay, one surgery, one serious illness, and you're financially ruined. I'm going to tell you about Margaret. Not her real name, but a real situation. 73 years old, widow, owns a small condo in Sarasota. She bought in 2005 for $170,000. It's now worth about $340,000. Sounds great, right? Home equity. But her property taxes, even with homestead, are $3,200 a year. Her insurance is $4,800. Her HOA is $420 a month, which is $5,040 a year. That's $13,040 just to keep the lights on before utilities and maintenance. She gets $1,900 a month from Social Security, which is $22,800 a year. She's spending 57% of her income on housing costs alone. She has $9,760 left for healthcare, food, everything. She had a fall in 2023, broke her hip, surgery, rehab, follow-up care. Her out-of-pocket after Medicare and her supplement was $11,000. She had to take a reverse mortgage to pay for it. Now she's eating through her home equity at about $15,000 a year between the healthcare debt and basic living costs. She'll run out of equity in about 12 years, at which point she'll be 85, still alive probably, and effectively broke with nowhere to go. This is the thing about retirement planning that nobody wants to say out loud. The math that works at 65 doesn't work at 75 and definitely doesn't work at 85. Your costs go up, your income stays flat or grows minimally, and your optionality decreases every year. It's a narrowing funnel. And Florida's cost structure is making that funnel narrow faster than almost anywhere else. Fourth escalation, the climate risk compounding loop that nobody priced in. Here's what everyone knew. Florida gets hurricanes, it's hot, you need AC. Cool, that's built into the cost model. But what they didn't price in was the compounding second and third order effects of accelerating climate volatility on insurance, property values, and infrastructure costs. Hurricane Ian in 2022 did $53 billion in damage. Hurricane Idalia in 2023, Hurricane Helene in 2024 hit the panhandle. Hurricane season used to be a risk. Now it feels like a certainty. And insurance companies have long memories and good actuaries. They're not pricing based on the last 5 years. They're pricing based on their models for the next 20 years. And those models say Florida is going to get hit harder and more often. So insurance rates aren't just going up temporarily. They're repricing permanently to a new higher risk baseline. Citizens Property Insurance is already functionally insolvent without state backing. If they had to operate as a real private company with real capital requirements, they'd need to charge triple current rates. But they can't because retirees literally couldn't afford it. So instead, they charge rates that are too low, absorb losses, and pass the eventual bailout cost to either Florida taxpayers or federal disaster relief, which is national taxpayers. Meanwhile, the infrastructure costs are exploding. Sea level rise and increased flooding means cities and counties need to spend billions on drainage improvements, seawalls, pump stations, and road elevation. Miami-Dade County alone has a $20 billion price tag for climate adaptation over the next 40 years. Where does that money come from? Property taxes and fees. Which means every homeowner, including retirees on fixed income, gets to chip in to pay for infrastructure improvements required because of where they chose to live. And property values? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Coastal Florida property values are being propped up by a combination of ignorance, speculation, and people who are rich enough that insurance and tax costs are irrelevant. But the marginal buyer is getting more sophisticated. They're looking at flood maps, wind speed data, and insurance quotes. Increasingly, they're walking away. The properties that are most vulnerable to climate risk are also the ones where retirees with limited means are most likely to live. Not beachfront mansions, but older condos 3 blocks inland, mobile home parks in low-lying areas, modest houses in neighborhoods with poor drainage. So you end up with a doom loop. Climate risk goes up, insurance goes up, property taxes and fees go up to pay for infrastructure, property values stagnate or decline because marginal buyers walk away. But retirees can't walk away because they have their entire net worth tied up in that property. They're locked into a declining asset with rising costs and fixed income. It's financial death by 1,000 rate increases. Let me give you a case study with actual numbers so you can see how this plays out in real life. I'm going to call him Robert, 69 years old, retired electrician from New York. Moved to Port Charlotte in 2009, bought a house for $212,000, got a solid deal at the time because the market was crashed from the '08 crisis, put 20% down. Mortgage was about $1,200 a month. Property taxes, $1,800 a year with homestead. Insurance, $800 a year. Total monthly housing cost around $1,400 all in. He was getting $3,100 a month between Social Security and a small union pension. After housing, he had $1,700 for everything else. Totally manageable. Fast forward to 2025. He paid off the mortgage in 2021. No more mortgage payment, which should have been great. But let's run the numbers. Property taxes are now $2,800 a year, thanks to voter-approved school bonds and fire district assessments that aren't capped by homestead. Insurance is $5,400 a year. He's in a flood zone, so he needs flood insurance, which is another $1,900 a year. HOA fees for his neighborhood, which didn't exist in 2009, now exists, and they're $80 a month to cover a community pool and landscaping. So $960 a year. Total housing costs are now $11,060 a year. That's $921 a month. His income went up to $3,400 a month. So he's still cash flow positive at $2,479 a month after housing. Except now he's 69, not 61. His healthcare costs went from about $300 a month to $700 a month because he needs more medications and has regular doctor visits for diabetes and high blood pressure. There's another $480 a month in increased costs. He's now at $1,999 a month for discretionary spending. His utilities went up. Electric bill in summer months is $380 a month instead of $200 because rates went up and he's running AC longer. That's another $80 a month average increase. He's at $1,919. Here's the thing, he's not broke. He's not destitute. He's just stuck. His house is worth about $370,000 now. He has about $290,000 in home equity after accounting for selling costs. But where would he go? If he sold and moved to Georgia, he could buy a similar house for $280,000. He'd have a small amount of cash left, but he'd lose his Florida homestead protection. Georgia property taxes would be higher. He'd have to start over with doctors and pharmacy. His kids and grandkids are in Florida now. He's trapped by inertia, and the marginal math doesn't clearly favor moving. So instead, he just quietly accepts a lower standard of living every year. He stopped going out to dinner weekly. He dropped his golf club membership. He doesn't travel to see his sister in Arizona anymore. His life is just slowly constricting. And the worst part? He's one of the lucky ones. He owns his home outright. He has some equity. He has enough income to cover basics plus a little extra. The people below him on the income ladder, they're facing actual financial ruin. Now you might be thinking, okay, this all sounds bad, but what about the people who love Florida and refuse to leave? What should they actually do? Because here's the thing. I'm not trying to convince you Florida is uninhabitable or that every retiree should flee tomorrow. I'm trying to show you the structural cost dynamics so you can make an informed decision and plan accordingly. If you're currently in Florida and you're making the math work, here's the uncomfortable truth. You need to be doing 3 things that most people refuse to do. First, you need to radically stress test your budget for cost inflation. Most retirees budget assuming 2 to 3% inflation across the board. That's wrong. Housing costs in Florida are inflating at 7 to 9% annually. Healthcare costs inflate at 6% annually. Insurance costs inflate at 12 to 15% in Florida specifically. Your income, if it's Social Security and fixed pension, inflates at maybe 2%. Run your budget forward 10 years with those actual inflation rates and see what it looks like. I guarantee it's uglier than you think. If the math doesn't work in year 7 of that projection, you have a problem today, not in year 7. Second, you need to force yourself to quantify the option value of mobility. What would it cost you to move today versus in 5 years, versus in 10 years? Moving gets harder and more expensive as you age. Your health declines. Your energy declines. Your ability to rebuild a social network declines. If you're 65 today and healthy, moving is annoying but doable. If you're 75 with mobility issues, it's a nightmare. So the real question is, do you move while you still can, even if the immediate math is neutral, just to preserve future optionality? Most people never even ask themselves this question. They just drift until they're forced to deal with it in a crisis. Third, you need to get brutally honest about your housing cost structure and whether it's defensible. If you're in a mobile home park, you need to accept that lot rent increases are permanent and will continue. You should be modeling 6 to 8% annual increases. If that math doesn't work, you need to exit now while you can still sell your home for something. If you own a house with exploding insurance costs, you need to decide whether you're okay self-insuring. Some people are. They have enough assets that if the house burns down, they can absorb the loss. Most retirees don't. If you're not okay self-insuring, but you can't afford insurance, you're in an untenable position and you need to make a change. Here's my bigger point though. The Florida retirement trap is really a cautionary tale about 3 fundamental retirement planning mistakes. Mistake 1, optimizing for cost reduction instead of cost stability. Florida was cheap, so people moved there. But cheap doesn't matter if costs are volatile and rising faster than your income. A place that costs 20% more, but where costs are stable and predictable, is a better retirement choice than a place that's cheap today, but costs are exploding. You want boring in retirement. You want to know what your costs will be in year 10. Florida is the opposite of boring right now. Mistake 2, failing to maintain optionality. When you move to a low-cost location in retirement, you're making a bet that it stays low cost relative to your income. If that bet goes wrong, you need an exit plan. But most people burn their exit plan when they move. They sell their house in their old location, they cash out their equity, they spend down their liquid savings on the move and settling in. 5 years later, when they realize it's not working, they have no cash to move again and no home to go back to. Never make a one-way financial move in retirement unless you're absolutely certain. Mistake 3, underestimating the power of compounding cost increases against fixed income. This is the one that kills people. Inflation is a slow poison when you're on fixed income. 2% Social Security increases versus 7% housing cost increases means every year you get 5% poorer in real terms. Compound that over 10 years, and you've lost 40% of your standard of living. People don't think in compound terms. They think linearly. Oh, it's just $50 more a month. I can handle that. But it's $50 more this year, and then $60 more next year, and then $75 more the year after. In year 10, you're paying $350 more per month, and your income went up $80 per month, and you're completely upside down. This is why I keep hammering on the math. The math doesn't lie. The math doesn't care about your emotional attachment to location or your social network or how much you love your house. The math just says, can you afford to live here in 10 years? And for a lot of Florida retirees, the honest answer is no. Look, I've spent a decade analyzing balance sheets and cash flows. I've run my own business. I've made money, lost money, and learned expensive lessons about how financial systems actually work. And here's what I know. The most dangerous financial situation is the one where you're slowly going broke, but the decline is gradual enough that you don't panic and make a change. Florida retirees are in that situation right now. They're not facing an immediate crisis. They're facing a slow, grinding decline in living standards that won't force them to act until it's too late to act effectively. What 99% of people do is usually what not to do. And 99% of retirees in trouble right now are doing the same thing. They're staying put, hoping costs stabilize, hoping for the best, making small adjustments, and telling themselves it'll work out. It probably won't. The ones who will be fine are the ones who look at the math right now, accept what it's telling them, and make proactive changes while they still have options. So if you're in Florida or thinking about retiring there, you need to ask yourself 3 specific questions. 1, can I afford to stay here if my housing costs go up 50% over the next 7 years while my income goes up 15%? 2, do I have enough liquid assets to move if I need to? Or am I locked in by lack of cash? 3, am I staying because the math works or because I'm emotionally attached and hoping the math will somehow improve? If you can't answer yes to question 1 and you answered no to question 2, you're already trapped. You just don't know it yet. And hope is not a financial strategy. The Florida retirement dream is turning into a trap for people who can't afford the new reality. Don't be one of them.